Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is iGaming History, and Paris Smith joins me. Thank you, Paris, for being with me
Thank
today.
you.
How are you? How's it going for you?
Very, very well. Really getting ready for the conference season. It's after the holiday season.
It's going to start very, very, very soon.
Yeah.
Absolute pleasure to have you here. I absolutely love your story. It is a very cool story, and I definitely thought it needs its chapter here.
Thank you.
Let's start with the beginning. Basketball.
That was the very, very beginning. And small factoid, where I live in a town of 500, where I used to live, there was no girls basketball. And my dad was like, I'm going on the school board and I'm going to get girls basketball approved. I was not very popular with the boys. This is like grade 4 in America. And but the interesting part of it all is I've always had, that confidence, imagine it just didn't exist. My dad's like, you want to play basketball? We're going to let you play basketball. And then I was able to play Pee-wee basketball, where I started my amazing career. And it was literally my life until I graduated from university.
So you play competitively?
Yeah, I played high school and college.
Can you share a story or two about that? How was it like?
Yeah, I was always, again, just to kind of put picture around the story. So first it started with my dad supporting me. Then in high school, I played all day, every day. I never had a job until university. And I would play with my brother, 6 years older. And in the summers, I would play with my brother's friends who some played college, but they were very, very competitive. So here I am, like in grade 7, playing with these guys that are in university. So imagine the ability that I had to get at a higher level. And they were not easy on me. I've never had the situation where somebody's like, oh, be nice to her, she's a girl. It never existed for some reason. And it's a great thing, of course. It helped shape who I am today. But so, there's a million stories. This is a terrible one, but when a coach says, come on, like people are kind of lagging behind, I just assume they're talking to me. So we're in practice one day and my coach is like, come on, box out, get more aggressive. And then I just kept getting more aggressive and more aggressive. She was playing with us because she was a college player, and she would guard me. I boxed her out so hard, I broke her ankle. I was just a brute. There's no other way to put it. So then, she had a cast. So we'd go to games and people are like, what happened to your foot? She's like, oh, scrimmaging with Paris.
Yes.
So yeah, I was very, very competitive. But the one thing, other than like team, that's just in me. I think, and that's what created my leadership style. I wasn't an academic person at all. Well, not at all, but, I did graduate. But that leadership, that competition, bringing people up around me so I could be on a winning team, all of those came from basketball. And I also loved the pressure. That's what gaming is. I admire every CEO, every executive. It's not easy. And I think nowadays it's complicated in a different way. And, so I have so much respect, but but you have to want that, you have to be able to deal with that pressure.
Yeah. What do you mean different in a complicated in a different way?
Because 30 years ago, it was startup. Your problems were figuring out how do you get money to people? Like, we started with the Western Unions and the quick collects and the FedEx cashier's checks, net teller, like all of those things. That was difficult. And we were in a creation mode. Nowadays, you're in a defense mode. And that defense mode is regulations, the changes, there's so many other, the compliance, wondering if you're going to get, fined because, something slipped through the cracks or somebody changed something and your system didn't read it properly. Like there's so many factors that overcomplicate the industry now, where we had different issues and uh, challenges back 30 years ago.
Take me back to that moment when you were on the beach and your dog was rescued. Well, walk me through it.
Yeah. I had been living on the island of Antigua for a year, and I'd had all these odd jobs, dive shop girl, blackjack dealer, real high end. They were on my resume, incidentally. But so I'm there on the island, and I'm like, my parents were like, go try to find a job. If you can't find a job, come home at Christmas. And I landed, and I'm like, because this is from a vacation. I was dealing blackjack, and then it was slow season, so I didn't have a job. And my dog, I was a big runner, so I would run to the beach, and my dog was more tired than I had anticipated. He went swimming, the current grabbed him, and the owner of Carib Sports, John Rogers, grabbed her and basically was like, "Is this your dog?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've been away and we just ran 4 miles. Apparently she's tired." Anyway, so then so that's how I met John Rogers. Right. So I meet this guy. And by the way, it was a weird thing because he's a very tall man. He's like 6'6", 6'7". So
Wow.
when he was out in the water, I didn't realize how far out my dog was because he was so big, it looked like it was still close kind of thing.
Hey.
Yeah. Anyway, but he had had a sports book already, and he's like, "So what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to find a job." And he's like, "Oh," he goes, I'm already staffed for the football season, but I have a friend, he's looking for people to hire." And then from there, I went to the office and met my first employer. And when I walked in, I just didn't know what I was walking into, but it felt like a moment, and then he hired me. So that's when I started, July 7th, 1995.
Young fire.
You weren't born yet.
I was 2 years old. I was less than 2 years old.
Okay, well, you look very young.
Thank you very much. How do you feel about it now, knowing that it completely changed the trajectory of your life?
I'm a firm believer, and I mentor a lot of people that are just amazing. And I feel like sometimes you have to believe in the journey. And I've always been that way. Like I just always knew I was going to do something good, something great. And so how does a girl from North Dakota end up in Antigua? Well, I did an internship there. And, how do I end up being in sports betting? I was at the right place, the right time. And I just feel like if you have an awareness of what's happening around you and you're not afraid to talk to people, you're not afraid to network. Why would I just talk to some strange guy on the beach? Because I'm from North Dakota and we're extremely friendly.
Okay.
And he saved my dog. So, but it's just about following your path and taking those risks. And that worked for me, and it's continued to work for me. And it's always about your intention and your purpose. First, the intention. My intention was never to be exactly where I'm at. My intention was to help the owner of the company grow the business, to make him a lot of money and allow him to have a life, because all of the owners back in those days, John included, the guy who introduced me to Billy, they everybody worked around the clock. There was not Wednesday was your day off, because that was the slowest day for the American sports, right? But then there was never a day off. And then here you add casino, so forget it. Like holidays, there's just no time. So my intention was to help, and by doing so, I was able to organically and authentically move throughout the organization and be able to excel.
Do you think there's something in your upbringing that cultivated this intention to help, because a lot of people would just do the other way. Oh, I'm just here for a job and that's it.
Yeah.
I complete my 9 to 5 and then I'm done. But you clearly went way above that.
Yeah. That is 100% my upbringing. And, you know, I'm extremely close to my whole family, but my parents in particular. And everybody had a major contribution. You know, my parents supporting me so much from day one, starting, you know, before, like, my mom is just the most phenomenal woman, somebody everyone would aspire to be like, very, very strong, very kind. Um, and, and it's also just that North Dakota upbringing. You know, I was home last year for a class reunion at 36 years. And all the people, you know, I was like, I don't even know anybody there anymore. I haven't been back for 36 years. And I knew everybody. Like, it was the most surreal, amazing experience that I had. And, you know, just to see like those people guided me who I am, you know,
That's pretty
it's,
cool.
and everybody, it was a small town, right? They say it takes a village. And, you know, I'd be running in the morning and people would be taking out their garbage and like, oh, way to go. You know, you're doing great. And come to my basketball games and cheer me on. Like, it was a beautiful, beautiful community. So starting with that, and then my parents being so phenomenal. They're still going strong, by the way. They're 85. And I, you know, last summer I was inducted to the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame, and they were there. That was like the most amazing moment for me.
Super, super. So a lot of the story makes sense, as I'm piecing it together. Tell me about the early days of gaming. Yeah, Antigua was like a mecca in
Yeah,
the beginning, but it lost its grip. What
it did.
happened?
It did. So, you know, like at one stage, there were thousands. And when there's thousands nowadays, it's paper companies. Thousands back then were thousands of physical people living there, having offices. They had to have offices and villas just because there was no office space available. But it was thriving. They did a phenomenal job with cable and wireless. The government worked with the sports betting. I was a consultant to every area of the government because they wanted to know how can we help. But, you know, from the very onset, at that time, the prime minister was Lester Bird, and he was like, I need you to be genuine. You know, don't play us. Be, you know, what can we do to help you? But you need to help us from, you know, it can't be some rogue opportunity here.
Right.
So we collaborated very, very closely with the government, and it thrived. And then all of a sudden, somebody, you know, somebody who doesn't understand, decided, hey, we should put a black box on everybody's system.
Mm.
And that was like 25 years ago. So everybody's like, yeah, you're not getting on our system. That's just absolutely insane. So now there are functionalities of the black box, as you know, with all the different compliance. But back then it was just a ludicrous thought. And then they were pushing harder. Like basically they wanted more of the pie. You know, everybody has a role. And then when you see something, you're like, ooh, we can get more. But what they were already getting was beyond phenomenal. Like thousands of locals were employed with phenomenal salaries, right? Great opportunities, training, traveling, because everything is global. But they ended up trying to do too much. And the industry was like, well, we can go to all these other islands that had, you know, maybe better infrastructure or whatever it might be. For example, Curacao has a phenomenal infrastructure for the offshore industry. And then, yeah, so the government making changes, again, being a little bit greedy is what was the end of Antigua's gaming.
Is this a little bit of a recurring theme in the industry? Because obviously it wasn't the only island who did this. You're kind of, you know,
Well, let's segue from, so that is regulation, right? That was regulated offshore. You had Antigua, Belize, Curacao, Costa Rica. I'm not, it's never been clear to me if there's actually a license. Um, and then you have Anjuan and all these people that are popping up like crazy.
Yeah.
So that regulation, you right now, it is clear what you need to do. And, that's where I have a lot of respect for Curacao. They're in a major transformation. So hopefully very soon people will get a clearer understanding of what the expectations are and go back to the days of a collaborative environment. But the regulated, so that's pre-regulation, right? All those other ones that I just described. And some are black market, obviously, not Curacao, fortunately, but you have the regulated jurisdictions that are over-regulating. They're not understanding, they're not collaborating, and they independently are creating a very strong black market. You want to overtax, do this. The fact of the matter is, you cannot stop the technology. So you can say, oh, you can't be here, but there will be a way for either a VPN or whatever. There's technology is so far ahead of any government um, enforcement that you can say you don't want it, but rather if they were to work with the industry and say, how do we get that black market onshore? How do we do that? And you do that by allowing operators to be creative, to run their companies in a way that are competitive, not over regulation, over compliance, things like that. There's fundamentals that have to be in place. The KYC, know your like everything, understanding where the money comes from. Those are all very, very standard. Nobody would ever say, "Oh, we don't want that," right?
Mhm.
But between crypto and technology, overregulation creates black market business. And the people that are guiding the governments, this thing with the UK, oh, well, we're going to make this much money. No, you're not.
No.
Nobody's going to tolerate that because we don't have to. They want to do the right thing because it's a business and there's sustainability that you have to consider. So if you have a public company or even a private company, you always want to do business the correct way. But when you're being prohibited from the regulators not understanding what they're doing and the impacts of that, that's where, that's my big stress and frustration.
It's everybody's. Like with the UK, at least all of LinkedIn went
That's
wild.
just the worst example.
Yeah,
The worst.
yeah, unfortunately. Let's go back to you a bit. So you, throughout your career, you rose up through the ranks very quickly without asking for a lot, really. What do you think people saw in you that made you indispensable? We talked about your desire to help, and I think that fits into the question, into the answer perfectly. But what else do you feel like? What did you do differently compared to others?
Well, the first word, indispensable, I believe everybody can be replaced. So if you go in thinking that you're indispensable, chances are your longevity is just shrunk down. But it's really just it was a lot of the person that I am. I'm not like I'm super competitive, but I don't have an ego. I mean, imagine the company Pinnacle. Like they have the most brilliant minds that work in the industry. The concept from almost 30 years ago still hold, this is like the one of the only companies that you can't recreate it because their story is so unique. They did everything right along the way. They transitioned to AI before AI was really, with the machine learning and the modeling. Like they've just done things so right. So I think, just having that mindset of, so with that example, I can leave Pinnacle and it can still function. right? So I've just never felt like I was indispensable. And I always, um, another thing, I think sometimes good, sometimes bad. I'm just all about the people, right? So the good part is I was smart enough and didn't have the ego to bring smarter people around me, right? But also, um, the passion, it's the concept of like I was people, product, profit. A lot of companies are profit, product, people,
Okay.
right? And for me, if you don't have great people, motivate people, inspire people, they're not going to be able to derive the best product, which will give you the highest profit. So when you look at profit first and you forget about the people, there's always, I mean, there's so many companies that have highs and lows, and it's all, a lot of it is about the shift in the management and the leadership, the mindset.
Did you ever connect it to basketball in the sense that you need a good team to win?
Always, always. And those basic concepts, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the biggest ones. So I always, my one of my little mantras was setting people up for success. What I learned maybe a little later is sometimes people aren't equipped. They don't have the capability. They have the desire, but they're just not capable. So I might have given some people too much time, but yeah.
Okay. But what do you think is a good approach for that? When somebody is ambitious, but they don't have the capability yet?
That the key is honesty, right? So like I always treat others the way I want to be treated. So if I'm not doing the job, if I'm not, capable of doing something, just tell me. Don't one day say, "Oh, we don't want you here anymore." Why not? What am I doing wrong? Right? So
Right.
I always feel like that honesty and transparency is key. There have been hundreds of people over my 30-year career that I have parted ways with, in from the employment perspective. And there's probably 5 out of the hundreds that you know, they don't really exist to me.
All right.
The rest I'm close to, I'll help, I see, I'm friendly, it's yeah, but it's, when you have to have that conversation of, you know, you're not, the company has shifted, the company is elevated. We need you to do this. We give you the chance. It didn't work out, blah, blah, blah. Like some people are like, hey, thanks for being honest. And some people are like, you hate me. Like,
Uh,
I have no feeling, to be honest.
they they take it personally. They take it.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of honesty, you
Mhm.
were talking to a lot of customers who were leaving WWTF for Pinnacle, and
Yeah.
had those conversation with them, well, conversations. What did you learn from those talks about what batters really value?
Yeah. Well, they value, well, the bettors that, especially at that time, because all the bettors had multiple sports books, but they valued the 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 value, right? They were like, why would I bet with you when I have to bet 110 to win 100, and at Pinnacle on certain sports they're betting 102? I'm like, oh, well, it's not sustainable. It's not going to work. Well, of course it did work because they had everything covered. But yeah, so I learned that one, my customer service was my team, not me. They were phenomenal. WWTS was known. We had all female clerks, and they were known as the best of the best in the industry. And then I also learned that, it was part of being in a club almost. Because remember, there was no internet. Like this word of mouth was the most insane. Everybody had a very similar story. Oh, I was playing golf. I was at my country club. I was with my friends playing poker. And they all bet with Pinnacle. So I have to have an account there. I'm sorry. I'm like, well, I understand, but and then they would still bet with other books, but their main book was always Pinnacle.
All right.
Yeah.
What brought you from 11 years with WWTS to Pinnacle?
Yeah. Well, WWTS sold 3 years prior, and they were publicly listed. First in Australia, they're moving to the AIM in London. And for me, my personal opinion, sports betting companies should not be publicly listed. There's too much risk. And the company was, and this, you see it constantly, um, and even within the US, like there's amazing sportsbook products, but I'm always like, oh, nobody's a real sportsbook because you don't, because they kick out winners. So I'm like, how can you be a real sportsbook? You're sitting there watching the Pinnacle line, you're kicking out winners. This doesn't make any sense. But there is a very specific, you have to react to the market. If you have that volatility, your stock value goes way down, your investors, it's this whole public market thing. I call it more of the street, and trying to make them happy and have that risk appetite that you need to have in the sports betting. It's just not consistent. So I was more than happy once, because I there was a clause that I had to stay with the company for X years. Once that clause was over, I was more than happy to move to Curacao. And of course, watching the, like within that 3-year had to be there period, I was a Sopranos freak. And I'm watching, and they're mentioning Pinnacle in the show. I almost died.
Wow.
I was like, oh wow. And then at that moment, in the back of my head, because I'm very loyal, it was a little bit of, if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, it's a very valid approach to doing things. What was the transition to Pinnacle like? Did I read correctly? So you went there, they didn't even know you were hired.
Yeah.
You had to wait for somebody.
Yeah, I was waiting out in the hallway. The main guy, the head of finance at that time, he was on a call. So I just sat there and I'm like, I'm here to start working today. Oh no, we have to wait for Atta. I'm like, okay. And then I'm like sitting there, an hour passes. I'm like, and then I thought, let me call him. And I'm assuming they're telling him I'm here. And then he's like, oh my God, you're here. And he comes right out and brings me in. And everybody's like, what is she doing here? Who is she? And I sat down with every person in the business, every single employee, and explained. And they're kind of like, oh, okay, well, she's been around, the industry long enough. So, okay, she knows what she's doing. And the fact that I'd done every job of the people I was speaking to, that was quite helpful. Yeah. But, and then when I, it still is such an incredible company. It's, anybody who had the luxury to be put in there, you're going to be successful to a degree. You're going to be part of success for sure. Whether you can add to that success, that's the key. So it was, but I did realize that I could definitely help. No org chart, nothing. They were just hugely successful. And then we put in the, more of a structure. And, it was a long journey, but it was an amazing journey with some amazing people.
Did you feel that when you sat down with each and every one of them, you gained their respect like that?
I think so. Just, and mostly, I mean, anybody can walk into a job and talk to people, but when you can say, oh, I used to answer the phones. Oh, I've done all the payments. I've done this, I've done that. That definitely was, and that was part of why they wanted to hire me, right? Because I just knew the industry and my reputation was very, very good, fortunately.
So you join, the UIGEA hits, everything goes to hell. Walk me through what was happening back there.
Yeah. So that hit, and that was like, wow. So we ended up, it wasn't, Pinnacle was massive. So you couldn't just, party poker, they just turned off overnight. Like, kudos to them. But I was kind of like, I wonder what we're gonna do. And I'd have a whole history with gaming. So I'm like, for me to work in a company that's trading in the US wasn't in my best interest. But I was there. I had to figure out what is their agenda. So I had a legal opinion done. And the legal opinion basically said, no matter how you twist it, turn it, um, you need to consider leaving the U.S. market. And I shared that with them. And then one day, so I knew it was going to be in the horizon to exit. But I just didn't know when. And one day I get a phone call, and it was January 7th. And they said, what you said made a lot of sense. I think we're going to do this. And I go, okay, like after NBA playoffs, after Super Bowl, no, the 11th. I'm like, the 11th of what? January. And we did everything. We transferred money to NetTeller so everybody could get their funds paid out. We had to get the system to the point where when we turned it off, there were no transfers, no casino, no poker, no sports betting for the US players. They could see their money, get their money, but they couldn't place any bets. They could see the information. So there was nothing wrong with that. And after no sleep, 4 days later, we pulled the trigger.
So you lost what, 60% of the player base?
Yeah, over that.
How
And then probably like 65, 70% of the player
do you
base.
deal with that? Like
What's that? How do you?
how do you deal with that?
Yeah, you just cry. Just cry. Get it out. No. You know what though? But it was the right thing to do. And that's, when I went into Pinnacle, talking about following that path, when I went to Pinnacle, I had tons of job offers, and they were my fit. And they were just such phenomenal people. They all had different philanthropical goal, things that they did. And they were just good people. And they were always, doing the right thing was always very important to them. So I knew I was at the right place. And then, it was hard, but it was also interesting because all those people that had been what I used to call the Pinnacle wave, because it was just, you just rode it and it was great. They all became more part of the future success of the company. Right.
All
So
right.
everybody had to step up, and the ones that weren't doing anything, it was crystal clear and they had to go. And the ones that were performing, it was very clear what their contributions were. So it was a really nice time as well. And everybody really pulled together. And then I started traveling to Asia a lot.
Speaking of, yeah, so in 2008, you become CEO and you decide that you're gonna shift to Europe and Asia, right?
Yeah.
Well, like what? Walk me through the story.
So many learnings. This is why I have a career in consulting right now. Because, I learned everything what not to do for sure. But, it's all about localization. It's all about partnerships, and just to understand we were fortunate to have a phenomenal partner in Asia that when I traveled, I wasn't just randomly like, where do I go? I had somebody that had an agenda from 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. every day. And, I would just meet everybody, do the karaoke, see their offices, listen to what people's issues were, take those, bring them back home and make sure that we can get things resolved. It was a grind, but it was, I learned so much. But the biggest lesson is every single part of Asia, it's not Asia. Every single specific area has a very localized approach. And it's the same thing in Europe, and it's the same thing in Brazil, and it's the same thing in Mexico. And, it's when you think that you can go in and just dominate everything, you can't. You have to be very specific.
Can you give me an example of I don't want to say extreme but like a huge difference from one country to another. It doesn't matter where, from Asia, Europe, but what
Mhm.
your
Well,
mindset,
it's
worlds apart.
yeah. Well, there's so many, I mean, it's the colors, Malaysia likes blue, China likes red, so there's little things like that. Of course, the payment solutions, that's so critical. Like if you don't understand that, just go home.
Yeah.
Um, but one of my favorite stories, an offshore company went into the UK market. I'm not going to name the company because that's mean, but they did like a $3 or $4 million launch party for their, I think it was poker, maybe even, and they didn't have the currency.
Wow.
I love it. The little basics.
My God.
But yeah. But there's also like the way in which you speak to people, the understanding of, like if you are going to operate in China, you're not going to say, hey, we think you have a problem with gambling. I mean, maybe you should, but like, especially when I was more active, and that was like 15 years ago, there are certain things that you do normally in a Western market that you do not do in a Asian market.
Right. You were one of the few women leading a major sports book. Like looking back now, what obstacles do you recognize you didn't see at the time?
Hmm. Yeah, I was very oblivious to that. Um, I didn't look at anything as an obstacle. I always looked at everything as an opportunity,
Mhm.
right? Because so they would have to meet with all the sportsbook owners all the time. So, for me, it was business, you know. I
Mm.
wasn't at karaoke to have fun. I was at karaoke for business.
Right.
And then having the ability to know what I'm talking about and be able to, if they had a problem, I could make phone calls and we could try to resolve some immediately, some down the road. Um, yeah, I never felt it. And it was, from the very onset of my career all the way to the end, there were different things where I would be treated differently from specific groups. So, in my first job, I didn't get the financial um, benefits that some of the guys that did much less than me were getting. I didn't care. I'm not going to sit there and, oh, he has a $2 million house. I don't. Well, I don't care. Like I was just doing my job, being grateful for the opportunity and learning.
Mhm.
And, I just always feel what comes around goes around. Whatever I'm supposed to have, I will have. Right.
Mm.
So that was from the very beginning. Then there's little pockets, of people that try to make a big deal about, oh, well, she's a woman, she's very sensitive. And I'm like, well, you don't know me. Um, very emotional. I'm like, I'll fire my best friend if they're not doing their job. So, but so I don't know. I just always looked at those things as not obstacles, but noise, very focused. I mean, I was always very focused.
What do you feel have been your greatest accomplishments?
Um, in the industry, I have two great accomplishments, and it's because it was outside of the day to day, right? You go every day in your grind, but to be recognized through the gaming industry in 2017 with the Sports Betting Hall of Fame. That was very special, to be honest with you. It started in 2016. I hadn't heard of it. So when they called me and said that I'm being inducted into it, I was like, is this a joke? And I was in London for a business deal anyway. So I thought, okay, I'll go to the dinner. Let's see what this is like. I'll even put on a nice dress. And then it was like real. And it was phenomenal. And I was just so touched that, when you just sit and work, you don't even think about it. So when you stop and somebody goes, hey, we recognize your contribution to the industry, That was great. And then there's another Hall of Fame, and this is like old school. And this is the legends that created betting. So it's a sports gambling Hall of Fame. And the likes of Roxy Roxborough, Billy Walters, Jimmy Everts. There's so many phenomenal people that are in there. To be in that group, that was beyond surreal for me. We had a dinner, and I felt like I was in this like dream of sports betting, and all the different people at the table, the other two gentlemen that were being inducted with me. It was phenomenal. So those are my most proud moments, when the people that helped create me recognize me 30 years later as somebody who deserves to be amongst their, their presence was really special. And then my greatest achievement of my life is raising my beautiful daughter, who's my business partner.
How did you decide to include her in the business? Is it something that grew naturally?
Yeah. She's just super smart, and she's everything I'm not. She's very calm. She's just really, she's such a great compliment to me. So when I left Pinnacle and I started my own business with Life Winning, which is advising, consulting, leadership coaching, and angel investing, she had a great job, and I'm like, you know what? I think I need help. And I just needed, all these years of traveling. Like, the person who sacrificed the most in my career was her. And she was always so kind and, no, mommy, go, it's okay. I promise I'll do my best in school. Biggest supporter ever. I give her a lot of kudos to my success in my career. But, and then just, she grew up with it. Lefty Rosenthal was an advisor to WWTS. I talked to him every day. She called him Uncle Frank. Like, she knew everybody. She met all of the people that, everybody would die to meet. She would call him uncle, so it was a natural fit that way. And then, we do, her passion is, giving back. So we have a lot of projects that we give back to. So that keeps her motivated, and just growing what we're doing is fun, and just spending time with her is phenomenal. People prefer her over me. It's getting a little bit annoying.
I wanted to talk to you about Life Winning, but before I get to that, I wanted to ask you, so what, more than a decade, like 17 years as a CEO is unheard of almost these days. It used to be more popular up until the 90s, maybe a bit after that, but nowadays you don't have it anymore. And people see the Hall of Fame, the success, all that. But what do you think is the biggest sacrifice that you have to make to achieve all of this?
Yeah. Again, I never look back and regret, but, I never had a personal life. Never. Like, I found love at 51 years old, for crying out loud. Like, that's, but I wouldn't change it, and it was worth the wait, but I just never had time. And, so obviously my daughter, she sacrificed a lot, but she always made the best of it. And, every moment we had together was quality time. I was always very present for her. And then, like, even things, what I'm doing now, like, when you're living it, you don't even realize it. You just do it. But, now when I go for lunch with my friends, I'm like, God, I didn't go for lunch. I didn't have time. I would order my food, get to the restaurant, sit down, eat, and leave, because I was like 35 minutes in and out. I got to get back to the office. So, that extraordinary sacrifice to the job. I was married to the job, for sure. So that would probably be considered the sacrifice, but I probably dodged a lot of bullets at the same time.
I think so.
Yeah.
Tell me about Life Winning. So it's advising, angel investing? Like, what's the motivation behind this? I assume giving back is one of them.
Yeah, that's well, and like being able to share those mistakes that I've made, right? I
Okay.
mean, why would everybody have to fall down, you know? If I can explain to you and help you, I also know like being in that role, for example, when I'm mentoring people and they're looking for a job, I know what I really want to hear. Like, I don't want to see your big flashy resume that has your corporate, what your company did. I want to know what you did. So if you come in and say, "Oh, I was part of DraftKings," and basically take everything that Jason Robbins did, that's not going to impress me. What was your contribution? What did you learn? So I do a lot of that, being able to put on my CEO hat. Um, but the biggest thing is for the startup community, right?
Mhm.
That right now, that is such a passion for me, helping them, guide them, connecting. You know, People have these beautiful, amazing ideas, but they just don't know how to get in touch with somebody. So, that's as well where Defy the Odds come in, and we're like the real connector. Um, and Life Winning does a lot of that through the investment community. We have this is a nice teaser. That's not another first. Um, we're starting another fund. I'm part of another fund called the Betting Startup Capital, and that's a partnership. We're going to be doing more podcasts and stuff to talk about it. But what motivated me? So first, it's all these people help me become who I am, and that's like the people from the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame, for example.
Mhm.
So grateful for that. And then, Jesse Learmonth used to work at Pinnacle. And we always had this dream of like creating an incubator type thing. But there is one, Zero Labs, but it took them a lot of years and a lot of effort. And thank God we didn't go down that path because we'd still be trying. But he did start the podcast, Betting Startups.
Mhm.
And by watching that and just supporting him, because that's, one of my favorite people I've ever worked with, um, that really drove the whole Life Winning organically. Because I would talk to people, he'd say, "Hey, can you talk to this guy and just kind of give him some feedback?" And then I would talk to him and I'm like, "God, that's a great product." He goes, "I love it." And I'm like, Let me put some money in here." Right.
Yeah.
So that's where it came from. So this whole chapter of my life is, helping people, like kind of continuing setting up people for success, but also giving back. And I just love watching, for years on panels, people would say, "What's the next innovation?" I'm like, "I have no clue, not a clue. How would I know? I'm sitting in Curacao. I'm not going to come up with it." But to be able to have the luxury to meet these people that do have the next big idea, I love it. I love it.
I wanted to ask you about Defy the Odds as well, because it's like
Yeah.
it was born in Curacao. You were talking with you, Kelly, and so, is this the main problem that you wanted to solve with connecting people because you saw the difficulty there, or does it have a different story?
Um, it was really, there's so many people that have ideas. And, originally it was like to help people cultivate that and make it come to life. That's very difficult. And, there's not a lot of commercial opportunity there. So, what we found is we know between the three of us over 80 years of experience in the industry. So we know a ton of people. Everybody has a different skill set. The Queen, the whole ICE and G2E, like those were started by Sue Schneider. She's the goat. Like
Yeah.
she's the GOAT, major connector. And by the way, I've known her my entire career, which is awesome. So for us to be able to work together finally was such a joy. And Kelly, she has such a great background in operations, and also, she worked for a fund, so and casinos. So I'm not great at casinos. So we have like this great package between all of us, and just being able to help even marginalized entrepreneurs, you know.
Mhm.
I have a couple investments where, you know, I've got like that very, you know, North American fraternity looking group, and then another group, they're still North American, but they have a different background, and just hearing how people speak about them differently. It's so interesting. And they're both amazing, but they're both very different. One's more technical, you know, one's more founder driven. It's interesting. So to be able to help support these marginalized entrepreneurs is, you know, it's something that it's not the only focus, but it is a focus. And I think people recognize that and they appreciate that.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you, but you think it's important for people watching this or future generations watching this to know?
Yeah, you know, one thing I find, like one of my biggest lessons is like when you are making a change, whether you're part of an organization, maybe there's a cultural shift or, you know, different management, whatever the reason. I mean, right now what I see, there's a lot of people leaving organizations or organizations downsizing. And, you know, I just feel like there's a whole mental health in the background of that, where, you know, unintentionally when somebody downsizes, you feel diminished as
Mhm.
for no matter what your role was. And just trying to encourage people to like remember the highlights, you know, a lot. And part of that diminishing is, you know, people are in jobs where whenever it's a great idea, it's their boss. And then, you know, when it's a bad idea, it's their fault. That was, I've had a couple moments of that in my career. But when that happens, like you kind of wonder who would hire me? What am I, you know? And it's really just to make sure that when you're making your transition, you have to kind of regroup, know who you are, and find the right fit for the organization, right? There's so many great companies out there. You know, I feel like we're going to go back to the day of investing in employees and, you know, making sure that the companies are built to go through different changes, whether it be downsizing or growing or getting a different vertical. You know, you've got an exchange that went into sweepstakes that might now be going into prediction markets. Like there's so many things transitioning. And it's when you're in the heat of it, which I've been, you kind of forget the criticalness of people, product, profit, and communication at the very top level of that. But you have to find yourself and really know how to like position yourself for your next big move. I talk to a lot of people about that.
I felt it as well. You feel like, oh, but am I not enough? But it's not the case.
Yeah.
You need to develop
It's
that.
just not the right fit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Paris, magic question. How would you like to be remembered in iGaming history?
Oh, wow. You know, just someone who like that full circle,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I started out knowing nothing, having that amazing group of people take me under their wings, help, you know, guide me, support me, allow me to make mistakes. That's one of the biggest gifts that I've gotten from all the different people that I've worked with. Um, and then giving back, like when I see the people that I've invested in early, sitting on a panel, you know, talking about being the subject matter expert of the area. Like that is the biggest joy. It amazing, amazing. So, you know, I hope I can help set up people for success and create that next generation of gaming success.
Your work shows. Your work shows. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure from my side as well. To everybody watching, I can leave the details about the Defy the Odds and everything
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
description,
And
right? So
LinkedIn is the best way to reach me.
LinkedIn, get in there, go. Thank you to everybody, and you'll hear more from us soon.
Thank you.
Bye bye.